In this story, I'm going to tell you how I, a 29-year-old barista, stopped my upstairs neighbor from stealing my sleep without calling the cops or breaking the law. But get this, I never confronted him. I engineered his undoing. I faked an official inspector notice, legally planted a hallway camera, and caught him so clearly on tape my landlord had no choice but to act. And what I found in his apartment afterward changed everything. Watch to the end. I'll show you every step and the one moral choice I still can't forget. My name is Lena McCarthy. I am 29 and I live in Portland, Maine, where the harbor fog feels like a low, insistent apology and gulls argue over the rhythms of dawn. I work as a barista at a small coffee shop near the waterfront, and I know the faces that pass through my neighborhood like chapter headings in a book I can't help but read. I know who wants a double shot and a little headroom, who wants almond milk and an extra pump, who will ask about the weather and tell a story about a dog. People like that I remember their orders. I like the steady ritual of tamping, of watching crema bloom like brown sugar on a quiet morning. The job is a kind of rhythm that steadies me when other parts of life feel like a loose thread. I rent a second-floor walk-up in a narrow brick building, whose cornices look as if they were carved by someone who cared less about straight lines and more about personality. I have poured hours into making the apartment feel like mine. Succulents on the sill catching thin sunlight, a chipped blue mug collection that leans toward poetry rather than matching, a battered record player that still smells faintly of cedar from my grandmother's chest. The place is small, but I have anchored it with the things that matter: an old wool blanket that was the perfect color, mismatched books in rough spines, a calendar scrawled with important dates in a handwriting I like to think of as hopeful. For as long as I can remember, I have been the kind of person who fixes things for other people. I forgive quickly, more quickly than is healthy, because it keeps the day moving and keeps other people lighter for a while. I'm the one who bakes a pie for a neighbor when their heater breaks, who says, "It's okay, even when it's not." That's how I learned the world, hands-on, practical, sympathetic. But there is a line between keeping the peace and being taken for granted. And when that line blurred under the heavy feet above me, the blur became a bruise. My upstairs neighbor, Gerald, had lived in the building longer than anyone, or so tenants were told. He favored stories about the building like someone collecting misremembered stamps. There was always a hint of exaggeration in the telling. He would stomp across the floors like a herd of small cattle at all hours, drag chair legs with theatrical relish, and slam doors in a way that made the plaster hum through my bedroom wall. At first, I chalked it up to old floors, to a building that complained when it shouldn't be asked to move gently. I left a courteous note, slid it under his door, something phrased to sound neighborly and not accusatory. I emailed management. I tried a calm conversation in the hallway, bright with the pretense of normalcy. Gerald smiled at me in a way that suggested he knew exactly how he sounded. He said something casual about being older and needing to keep to his routine. And then it escalated. The stomps adopted a timing that felt personal. 3 a.m. when I had a 6 a.m. shift, and my alarm would be ringing in a few hours. 2 a.m. right when my brain began to loosen and promise sleep. He kicked furniture across his floor with an enjoyment that was impossible to misread. It was almost an experiment in cruelty. Find the point where somebody bends and then apply pressure there. My hands began to shake on the steam wand. I couldn't make decent pours. I forced a laugh in front of customers. But at night, I would lie awake and listen to the way the apartment sheared into new noises. My body started to keep vigil for stomps the way a neighbor's dog keeps watch for nighttime squirrels. I tried the polite route. I left notes, wrote calm emails to the landlord, asked management if they could help mediate. Tenants, rights groups were sympathetic, but relied on bureaucracies that were slow by design. Security would not intervene without seeing the noise in person. Recordings, they said, were not acceptable evidence. The idea that I would have to answer my door in the dark to prove I had been tormented felt absurd. I imagine a person who was not me might have packed up and left. But rent in Portland doesn't concede easily, and the small things I owned anchored me as well as any lease. The more I was ignored, the angrier I became. That anger did not feel like a bright, heroic kind of fury. It was dull and mottled at the edges, the sort of resentment that breeds when you keep giving and nothing changes. My boss noticed the dark circles. Friends started bringing coffee and treats, trying to help me through filing complaints and arguing with management. I sought help from Ruth, an older neighbor with kind hands and a tendency to talk in old, sensible proverbs. Ruth wired me with a calm voice and practical suggestions. Keep a log, she said. Document everything. I did, with the fastidiousness of someone who believes documentation will save them. I called the emergency number promised by the landlord. Security didn't show. Management shrugged. Gerald laughed louder. It was when the stomps began to sound like performance art that I realized negotiation wasn't going to work. He didn't stumble, he staged. He took his time, waited for the exact hour he knew would slice into whatever rest I could steal, and then orchestrated the sound to make sure it echoed. He was not merely inconsiderate. He had decided my peace was one of his toys. That knowledge made the anger colder. I started to plan in small, petty ways at first. I left a smashed chair on the landing once as a passive-aggressive note. A polite card that read, "Please consider the noise." It made me feel ridiculous and hollow, the way acting like a child after years of trying to be an adult often does. The legal route proved labyrinthine. Complaints gathered dust on someone else's desk. Loopholes wriggled like eels in explanations about habitable conditions. I fell into a lousy, all-consuming arithmetic. Add hours of lost sleep, subtract willingness to be ignored, divide by the unresponsive systems. The arithmetic ended with me feeling small. That was the deeper injury Gerald caused. He made me doubt my right to simple domestic peace. I began to study him the way someone studies the weather. When it happens, what triggers it? Is there a barometer for when to hide? He had routines. He loved late-night television and often left the door open to catch the air. I found his pattern in small things: a delivery slip that read the name Kara flowering in the stairwell, the clink of cheap glassware when he entertained. Kara, younger, and at the diner across town, loved painted nails and loud laughter. Gerald performed a certain masculinity in the building, the heavy-footed, assertive presence, like a man auditioning for a role he had no script for. My plan turned on the idea that his performativity would be his undoing. If he feared being recorded or called out by an outside authority, he would change. He performed for audiences. If I created the illusion of a larger, official audience, he might stop auditioning in the middle of my nights. I do not take pleasure in hurting people, but I take pleasure in cleverness and in the exactitude of a well-placed plan. I bought a small, waterproof radio and recorded a looped audio file of a city ordnance inspector reading a complaint. It described repeated disturbances, cited a code about maintaining reasonable noise levels, and warned of inspections and possible fines within 48 hours of further complaints. I faked a formal-looking notice with letterhead and posted it on the building's public board. I slipped a copy under Gerald's door late, the way one might slide a bookmark into a book you intend to read again. Careful, precise, cold. I also purchased a small camera, legal, unintrusive, and installed it above the vestibule light in the stairwell, so it only captured the hallway. I did not record anyone inside their homes. I documented the comings and goings, the late-night footsteps, the man who seemed to take pride in his volume. For days I watched and waited. I called the landlord anonymously to ask if he had received other complaints, hinting that an inspection might follow. Landlords have an old currency called reputation. They feared it the way someone fears their own reflection. The landlord called Gerald in for a friendly chat, and when Gerald heard the word inspection, he went quiet. For a man who loved attention, the idea of being flagged and recorded terrorized him more than being exposed as loud. And then came the night I had been preparing for. I asked Ruth to be my witness at home. I asked my neighbor Marco, who lived on the first floor and loved a quiet building as much as he loved his Sunday crossword, to be ready to describe the sound. When Gerald launched into a stomping rampage one Friday night, Ruth called the emergency line the way the landlord's notice said tenants should. This time, the landlord came. Security came. I kept my camera rolling and captured each slam, each exaggerated drag. When the landlord stood in the stairwell and watched, he could no longer claim ignorance. He issued a formal warning the next morning and provided Gerald a timetable to be quiet, to fix his floors, or to face eviction. For the first time in months, I felt a dizzying, almost physical sensation of triumph. It was not applause. It was the return of a private, necessary thing, sleep. After that, Gerald softened. He stopped performing his late-night symphonies and instead put a felt pad under a chair as if apologizing through utility. I did not revel in the humiliation. It left a sour note in my mouth. There was a complexity to what I'd done. In making the building respond, I had engineered someone's displacement from a place he had lived years. But there was also the arithmetic of living. Compromise could not ask me to lose my livelihood or health. I learned, in a way I hadn't wanted to learn, how to gather evidence, how to use someone else's institutional fear to apply pressure without breaking the law. I learned I could be clever and moral at once, even if the cleverness left me with uneasy victory. There was an unexpected detail that folded in on itself later. During a maintenance check, the landlord casually mentioned a neat stack of old complaints and receipts found in Gerald's back closet, little documents that suggested involvement in insurance dodges years ago. I had not been snooping. I had not needed to. The building's administration found enough to make his stay untenable if it came up in the right light. Gerald left on a morning that wore winter like a heavy coat. He carried a small duffel. He left a mattress on the curb. He might have moved to a smaller town upstate. Or perhaps he simply moved away from people who would keep him on the edge of performance. I never sought him out to wish him well or ill. The complexity of sympathy and self-preservation does not always reward itself with clean endings. When his duffel left the building, he left behind a cheap wooden chair with one scuffed leg and a stack of mismatched mugs, relics of a man who had been loud and petty and human in ways I could not entirely reduce to villainy. I donated the broken chair to a thrift store, a small symbolic act of absolution. I left a handwritten card on the building's bulletin board afterward. Neighbors deserve respect. Please be mindful. It felt small and true. Marco stopped by the coffee shop a week later and said, "Nice notice, Lena. Quiet suits you." His approval made me feel human again in a way that was less about victory and more about restoration. Months on, the rhythm of my life returned. I make lattes that look like little suns. My record player still smells of cedar. I sleep without the dread that made me count floors before I drifted off. But the experience changed me in ways both practical and stubborn. I still forgive, and I still fix things when I can, but I no longer hand over my civility like a blanket because someone asks. I learned the utility of a voice and the power in documenting a truth that others might choose to ignore. I learned also to temper cunning with mercy. The victory was complicated, the lesson is clearer. Sometimes, as fog rolls in from the harbor and the city hums like an old refrigerator, I think of Gerald and his need to be loud. I wonder if he found a place where his stomps went unnoticed, or if he learned how to move with gentleness. I do not know, and I won't count on him having changed. What I do know is that I slept through the night the other night with a dent of sunlight over my blanket and the slow, small sound of people living life without clamor. I have a new plant by the window and a better record player. I have my nights back, and with them, a quieter sense of who I want to be. Someone who defends her peace with the same patience she once extended to others, and someone who knows when to stop fixing for everyone else and fix for herself.